My wife admitted to cheating on me at the company dinner with her boss. So I told her, take your things and get out of the house. Our children will know who you are. You destroyed everything we built together. The sentence came out of my mouth before I could think. My voice was shaking, not with weakness, but with pure fury. The air felt thick around us, heavy with the weight of a truth I never wanted to know. I looked at that woman, the same one I swore to love forever, and I saw someone completely different. The face that was once my refuge was now the face of my greatest disappointment. His eyes were teary, but there was no regret in them, only fear. Scared of what I might do, scared of what would happen next. The silence between us was an unbridgeable abyss. Every second carried with it the pain of years of loyalty undone in a single night. She tried to stammer out some explanation, but all I heard was an annoying buzzing sound, like the sound of an insistent mosquito. I didn't need to hear anything else. The fact was there, wide open, and it hurt more than anything I could imagine. Images formed in my mind without my having control. They laughing together. Him touching her like I did. Him kissing her, desiring her, taking what was mine for himself. My stomach turned just thinking about it. My chest burned like it was on fire. It was as if my home, my life, my marriage, everything had been reduced to ashes in a matter of seconds. But the betrayal wasn't just physical. It was something much bigger, much deeper. It was a betrayal of trust, respect, partnership. I had dedicated myself to this marriage for years. I worked hard to give her and our children a dignified life, I followed by her side through all the difficulties, I supported her dreams, I sacrificed mine. And for what? To be deceived, humiliated, betrayed in the most vile way possible. I knew that love could end, that marriages cooled down over time, but betrayal? This was not justifiable. That was a direct blow to any man's heart. She started to cry. Maybe she wanted me to comfort her, as I did so many other times in difficult times. But this time, I couldn't. I didn't want to. My pain was too great to leave room for anything else. She opened her mouth and started to explain herself, but I raised my hand, telling her to shut up. I didn't want an apology. I didn't want to hear lies to assuage her guilt. I wanted her to disappear from my life. Do you know what you did? My voice came out cold, controlled, but filled with venom. Do you know what you destroyed? Do you know what every brick of this house cost? Every achievement of ours? Did you throw away years of complicity for one night with your boss? Is that it? Tell me, was it good? Was it worth it? She sobbed. I don't know what to say. I laughed. A bitter, humorless, soulless laugh. Then don't say anything. Just leave. Get your things and go. Now. She hesitated. He kept looking at me as if he was looking for an opening, a chance, a last ray of hope. But there was nothing there for her. Nothing but contempt. I saw the exact moment she realized it. I saw the exact second he understood there was no going back. Our children will know. My voice came out cold, deadly. Her eyes widened. No, please. Yes. I crossed my arms. They'll know exactly who you are. They'll know that their mother threw away her family for a pathetic adventure. She fell to her knees, crying uncontrollably. But I didn't feel sorry. I felt nothing but a gigantic emptiness in my chest. I loved her. I loved with all my strength. But now? Now she was just another stranger. The pain came in waves, suffocating, cruel. I knew that night was just the beginning of the hell I would have to face. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to allow her to get away without consequences. She would feel the weight of her choices. And when everything was falling apart around her, when she realized the mistake she'd made, when he discarded her like an old, broken toy, then, and only then, would I be there to watch. But what if I told you that, in the end, she was the one who paid the highest price? What if I told you that fate dealt her with the greatest punishment I could ever imagine? You might think you know how this story ends. But I guarantee, you have no idea. Welcome to the channel where betrayal will never be romanticized or justified. Here, we believe that loyalty and respect are non-negotiable pillars in any relationship. All the stories are fictional, but they reflect a harsh, unchanging truth. Betrayal destroys homes, breaks trust and leaves scars that never fade. Get ready to dive into an intense narrative, full of twists and real consequences. You are about to hear a shocking story, where every choice has a price and the truth always comes out. Fasten your seatbelts. The story begins now. Daniel always believed that his life had followed a solid and predictable path. From the moment he met Laura, he knew that she was the woman with whom he wanted to share his years, his dreams and his achievements. They met in college, when he was studying business and she was studying advertising. He was a practical, methodical man, always seeking stability, while she was the opposite, full of ideas, spontaneous, passionate about new things. Somehow, they found balance in each other, like pieces of a puzzle that fit together perfectly. Over time, they built a stable life, a marriage respected by everyone around them, 2 children who were their greatest pride and a house that represented the fruit of years of effort. Daniel worked tirelessly at a technology company, climbing step by step until he reached a comfortable position that allowed his family a secure standard of living. Laura, on the other hand, had always had a freer spirit, but had stabilized in the marketing field, where her creativity was put to good use. They looked happy. At least that's what everyone saw. At least that's what Daniel believed. The house where they lived was a reflection of what they had built together. A spacious townhouse, decorated with Laura's good taste, with a well-kept garden where her children used to play on the weekends. The routine was predictable but harmonious. In the morning, Daniel left early for work, after a hastily prepared coffee and a quick kiss with his wife. Laura used to take her children to school before going to the agency where she worked. At night, they had dinner together when time allowed, and on the weekends they tried to fit in a family program. Little moments of simple happiness that made Daniel believe that, despite the natural wear and tear of the years, they still had a solid marriage. But sometimes, in the silence of the longest nights, he realized that something had changed. Laura no longer looked at him in the same way, she no longer made a point of being so present, she always seemed distracted, too busy with her cell phone, with messages, with her multiplying work commitments. But he never questioned it. Maybe out of fear of the answer. Laura's company dinners were recurring events. As marketing director, she actively participated in these social gatherings, where clients and executives came together to strengthen ties and discuss business in a relaxed atmosphere. Daniel never really liked these occasions, he found them tiring, full of flattery and hidden interests. But he always accompanied his wife, no matter how much he preferred to be at home with the children. That year, however, Laura insisted that he didn't have to go. He said it would be a formal, boring event for office staff only. He hesitated for a moment, but accepted. After all, he trusted her. Why wouldn't I trust? Their marriage had weathered so many phases. From the first years full of passion, to the difficult moments when they needed to balance the accounts at the beginning of their lives as a couple. They had overcome the difficulties of raising young children, the challenges of professional life, and scheduling conflicts. He was sure that they were still partners, that Laura was by his side as she always had been. The only thing that bothered him was the feeling that lately she was distant. Not in obvious gestures, but in small attitudes. The way he avoided eye contact at certain times, how he smiled at his phone when he thought he wasn't looking, how he seemed happier when he was out than when he was at home. But he always dismissed these thoughts as just paranoia. He refused to be one of those insecure husbands, who investigate their wife's every move, who live in the shadow of distrust. Their marriage was solid. He had no reason to be suspicious. But some nights were different. Some nights brought a heavy silence, a weight in his chest that he couldn't explain. When Laura arrived late from work, when she seemed less involved with her family, when she lay in bed facing the opposite way, avoiding any approach. He felt it, but ignored it. I didn't want to be that kind of man. Maybe it was just tiredness. Maybe she was just overwhelmed. Laura's boss was always a recurring name in her wife's conversations. She praised him as an inspiring leader, someone who knew how to motivate the team, who understood the market like no one else. Daniel never bothered about it. He was never the jealous type. He believed that a good work environment was essential and that Laura admired her superior was natural. But in retrospect, he noticed that her comments began to subtly change. Before, he was just an admirable boss. So, a brilliant leader. Then a friend. Then, someone with whom she shared professional confidences. And then, someone she spent more time with than necessary. He didn't realize it right away. But now, looking back, he saw the signs. The weeks leading up to the company dinner were marked by even more unusual behavior on Laura's part. She looked happier, more radiant, bought a new dress, spent more time in the mirror getting ready. He said he needed to impress, that it would be an important night. Daniel thought it was strange, but didn't comment. After all, who was he to judge? It was her event, her career. I didn't want to seem controlling. So he said good night and stayed at home with his children. But that night was not like the others. When Laura returned home, there was something different about her. I couldn't explain it. Something in her eyes, in the way she avoided talking too much about the event. Something about the way he looked away. Daniel asked how it had been, and she responded with short, hurried answers, without details. There was tension in the air. A silence that was not comfortable. A silence that hid something. He went to sleep with an discomfort in his chest, an uneasiness that he couldn't define. Something inside him told him something was wrong. Something inside him was starting to scream, even if he didn't want to hear it. But he still didn't know. I still wasn't sure. I still had no idea that that night would change everything. The days following the company dinner brought a strange feeling to Daniel. Something invisible, but present, like a shadow that crept around the corners of the house, something that couldn't be named, but that was there, pulsing in the air. Laura seemed normal, acted as always, smiled when necessary, kept her routine unchanged. But there was something about the way he moved, the way he looked away at the right moments, the way he avoided long conversations. Daniel tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself that everything was fine, that it was just paranoia. But then came the first night she turned off her cell phone before bed. He didn't ask anything, just watched. Maybe it was a new habit, maybe I was tired of the incessant notifications. But then it happened again, and again. The little details started to pile up. She started leaving early for work, citing meetings, events, and last-minute emergencies. I also arrived later, justifying dinners with the team, tight deadlines, difficult clients. The weekends became busier, there was always an urgent commitment, a last-minute demand. Daniel began to notice that moments alone between them were becoming increasingly rare. Her touch was more distant, her kisses were quicker, her hugs were shorter. The desires seemed to have evaporated, and when he tried to get closer, he felt the invisible barrier that Laura had erected between them. The children didn't understand anything. For them, everything continued as normal. The mother was still there, the father too, the routine was taking its course. But Daniel saw what no one else saw. And that began to consume his thoughts in a way he never imagined. One night, when Laura said she would work late, Daniel stayed up, waiting. The clock turned slowly, each minute a weight on his chest. When she arrived, almost midnight, she smelled something different. It wasn't perfume, it wasn't alcohol, it was something indefinable, something that stuck to the skin like an unwanted memory. He watched her silently as she changed, as she entered the bathroom, as she avoided looking him in the eye. He didn't ask anything. Not that night. The next morning, before she woke up, he took her cell phone. His heart was pounding, his hands were sweating, because he had never done anything like this before. But I needed to know. He needed to put an end to that doubt that was gnawing at him. Entered the password. Wrong. Tried again. Wrong again. And then he realized. Laura had changed the password. For the first time in years. He felt his blood run cold. What else was she hiding? From that moment on, Daniel began to pay attention to everything. In the moments when she left the room to answer calls, in the smiles she gave to her cell phone, in the messages she quickly deleted. He began to notice the schedules, the patterns, the excuses. Every detail that previously seemed insignificant now became a piece of the puzzle. That's when he decided to test it. He thought he would have a work trip, something last minute, just a night out. Laura seemed surprised, but didn't question it. On the night he was supposed to be out of town, he stayed in a nearby hotel, without turning off his cell phone, waiting. At 10 o'clock at night, he sent a casual message asking if everything was okay. Laura took a while to respond. After a few minutes, she said she was tired and was going to bed early. But Daniel knew it was a lie. He returned home in the early hours of the morning. His heart was pounding in his chest, the air felt heavy as he walked through the door. The house was dark, silent. He climbed the stairs slowly, breathing shallowly. When he entered the room, he saw the bed was empty. The sheet was still intact on his side. The restlessness within him grew. He walked through the house, down the hallway, went to her office. And then he found it. Her cell phone, forgotten on the table, still unlocked. The heart raced. With shaking hands, he picked up the device and opened the messages. And then the truth revealed itself before him. There it was. Every word, every sentence, every detail he didn't want to see. His name, her boss's name. The conversations, the meetings, the plans. It wasn't a mistake. It was not an unfounded suspicion. It was real. His eyes scanned the messages as if searching for something that could erase it, something that would say it was all a mistake. But there was nothing. Just proof, cold and irrefutable. He felt the world spin. The legs became weak, the chest tight. For a moment, he thought he wouldn't be able to breathe. Laura had cheated. And nothing would be the same again. The house was plunged into a dense, suffocating silence. Daniel felt the heavy air around him, as if the environment itself knew the truth that he now carried within himself. Laura's cell phone was still there, inert on the table, but to him, it looked like a bomb that had already exploded and left shrapnel everywhere. His fingers were gripping the device so hard that his knuckles were white. He knew he needed to calm down, but how? How could he maintain control when everything he built had crumbled before his eyes? He took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts, but the pain was overwhelming, burning like an open wound that couldn't be closed. Laura went down the stairs calmly, fixing her hair, without noticing his presence. When he saw him, he stopped abruptly. Daniel's gaze was cold, hard, unlike anything she had ever seen before. For a moment, she hesitated, as if her body had understood before her mind could even process it. He didn't say anything right away. He just lifted her cell phone, leaving the screen lit between the two of them. Her face paled. Eyes darted to the device, then back to it. Her breathing became shaky. He finally spoke, his voice carrying a dangerous tone. "Do you want to tell me something, Laura?" Her silence was deafening. No words, no gestures, nothing that could reverse what had already been done. The seconds dragged by, and she seemed unable to articulate any response. But he didn't want an apology. I didn't want empty justifications. He wanted the truth, raw and painful as it was. She swallowed hard. "Daniel. I can explain." He laughed, a laugh without any trace of humor. Explain what, exactly? How you destroyed our marriage? How you made a fool of me this whole time? Or how easy it was to lie to me all those nights? He took a step forward, and she instinctively backed away. You were with him yesterday, weren't you? The hesitation on her face was all he needed. Answer. His voice rose, filled with an anger he had never felt before. Laura closed her eyes, as if doing so could push reality away. Yes, she whispered, almost voiceless. But he already knew the answer. The confession fell between them like thunder. Daniel felt his stomach drop. Even knowing the truth, hearing the words come out of her mouth made everything so much more real, so much more unbearable. He ran his hands over his face, trying to contain the fury that was pulsing inside him. How long has it been? The question came out sharp. Laura hesitated again. Daniel. How long has it been, Laura? Her eyes were full of tears now, but he didn't feel sorry. Just contempt. A few months, she confessed, and then the final blow, since before the kid's last birthday. He closed his eyes for a moment. His chest rose and fell rapidly, as if he were suffocating. Her every word was a knife that ripped a piece out of him. The betrayal was already unbearable in itself, but knowing that during his children's birthday, while he was smiling with his family, while he believed he was experiencing a moment of genuine happiness, Laura was already involved with another man, that was a blow he didn't know if he could bear. But then came the question he didn't want to ask, but needed to be said. Do you love him? Laura was silent. Daniel's heart was beating so hard that he could feel the beat in his ears. He needed the answer. He needed to know if it had all been just a passing desire or if she no longer loved him. I don't know, she finally replied, and that answer was even worse than a yes. He laughed, but this time there wasn't even a hint of humor. You don't know. You destroyed our lives and you don't know. He shook his head. Then I'll make it easy for you. Take your things and get out of this house. Our children will know who you are. Her gaze was filled with despair. Daniel, please. I'm still their mother. He stared at her, his eyes shining with suppressed fury. A mother who destroyed her own home. The silence fell between them again, thick, sharp. But then, when Laura seemed to finally accept what he was saying, when she lowered her shoulders in surrender, Daniel saw something change in her expression. A different terror took over his eyes. He frowned. What it was? Laura hesitated, and then murmured barely audibly. There's something you don't know. His anger exploded again. Anything else? What else could you hide from me, Laura? What else? Her gaze trembled. It's not about us. It's about him. Daniel narrowed his eyes. What about your lover? Her silence irritated him even more. Speak quickly. She took a deep breath, her face contorting in a mix of anguish and fear. He didn't tell me at first. I only found out after it had already happened. Daniel felt his stomach drop. What are you talking about? She hesitated once more before finally blurting out the truth he never expected to hear. He's married. Daniel's world spun. The betrayal was devastating in itself, but now there was another layer that was even more cruel. The man for whom Laura had thrown away her marriage, the boss she said she admired, who she described as someone trustworthy, respected, professional, was also a traitor. He also had a wife. He was also destroying another family at the same time he was destroying his own. Daniel felt nausea rise in his throat. You knew that since when? His voice was lower now, filled with absolute contempt. Laura lowered her head. I found out a few weeks ago. He said he was going to tell his wife, that he was going to fix everything. But I don't know if that will happen. The explosion inside Daniel was immediate. Are you telling me that in addition to cheating me, you became the other one? You accepted being a married man's second option. The contempt in his voice was overwhelming. Laura started to cry, but he didn't want to see. I didn't want to hear it. He pulled away, as if touching her would contaminate him. Get out of this house now. She tried to speak, tried to get closer, but he took a step back. Now. Laura finally realized that there was nothing more to be said. That there was nothing to be saved. She hurriedly picked up her things, sobbing, unable to look him in the eye. As she walked out the door, Daniel felt his chest burn. He felt everything inside him crumble. And then, a cruel thought appeared in his mind. Her boss's wife, did she know? Daniel stood in the middle of the room, feeling the weight of the door close behind Laura. The sound echoed through the empty house, carrying a cruel and definitive meaning. She's gone. The woman he loved, who he believed he knew, who shared his life for years, was now just a shadow of the past. But the silence that remained brought no relief, only an overwhelming emptiness. He looked around and realized that everything looked the same, but nothing made sense anymore. The sofa where she used to sit was there, untouched. The dining table still had dishes from the previous night's dinner. The walls, which had once witnessed so much laughter, now seemed cold, soulless. He ran his hands over his face, trying to contain the storm inside him, but it was impossible. The anger still burned, but now it was mixed with something worse, a sense of betrayal that went beyond the marriage. He wasn't the only one deceived. Laura's boss's wife was also living a lie, as blind and trusting as he had been all this time. How would she be now? Suspicious? Naive? Did she already suspect? Could it be that there were nights when she, too, lay awake, feeling something was wrong but unable to name what it was? The thought hammered in his mind, growing like a dangerous idea. Should he tell? Should I destroy once and for all the charade that this man maintained? Anger said yes, that no one deserved to live in darkness like he did. But the pain said that this meant reopening a wound that might never heal. Laura's betrayal was already unbearable. Was he ready to carry the burden of being responsible for revealing the truth to someone else? He took out his cell phone and, with his hands still shaking, began typing her boss's name on the internet. He quickly found the man's profile, his arrogant face printed in photos of corporate events, in lectures, in important meetings. But then, as he scrolled down the page, he found something that made his chest tighten even more. A recent photo. He, alongside his wife and children. A simple but devastating caption. Family is everything. Daniel felt a bitter taste in his mouth. The irony of those words was suffocating. That man had destroyed not just one family, but two, and he was still smiling as if nothing was happening. As if your life were untouchable. As if he could continue lying to everyone without ever facing the consequences. The dilemma in his mind intensified. If he told, he would destroy that woman the same way he was destroyed. But if he remained silent, he would be allowing the lie to continue, that man to continue unharmed, without paying for what he did. He knew exactly what she would feel when she found out. The knot in your stomach, the loss of air, the feeling that the ground opened up and swallowed everything. She knew the pain wouldn't go away quickly, that it would become a scar that she would carry forever. Did he want to be responsible for this? He grabbed a glass of whiskey and drank it in one gulp, as if the alcohol could dissolve the weight of the decision. But nothing helped. His entire body pulsed with the need to act, but at the same time, with the fear of what would come next. He imagined the scene. The moment the boss's wife would read his message, the moment his world would fall apart. He could almost hear the sound of the cell phone falling from her hand, the horrible silence that would follow, the way her heart would break into pieces, just like his. She would also spend sleepless nights, reliving every detail, looking for signs she hadn't seen before. She would spend hours questioning every moment, every word her husband said, trying to understand where the lie began and where the truth ended. He held the cell phone tightly, looking at the screen hesitantly. Her name was already there. He had found it quickly, her profile was public, and there were the smiling photos, the happy moments. She had no idea. Not yet. His breathing was rapid. His fingers hovered over the screen, ready to type. But then, a memory invaded his mind. Your children. Their faces appeared in his mind like a blow. They didn't know yet. They still didn't understand. To them, their mother was just a mother, and their father was just a father. They didn't know that the world could be so cruel, that love could fall apart like dust in the wind. How would he explain it to them? How would they find the words to describe what had happened without breaking something inside them forever? The truth always had a price. And sometimes, that price was too high. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. His pain was still immense, but now there was something stronger growing inside him. A clarity that I didn't have before. He couldn't change the past. I couldn't go back in time and stop Laura from doing what she did. But I could choose what I would do now. And then, he made a decision. He unlocked his cell phone and started typing. But the message it would send would not be what he had thought before. It would not be driven solely by anger, nor by the desire for revenge. He would write to let that woman know the truth. But he would also write so that she could choose what to do with this truth. Because, in the end, he knew better than anyone that a lie held for too long only became more cruel when revealed too late. And now, he would no longer let the lie prosper. Daniel remained motionless for a few moments, his eyes fixed on the cell phone screen, where the written message was just waiting for a touch to be sent. He took a deep breath, the weight of that decision pressing on every fiber of his body. The name of Laura's boss's wife shone at the top of the conversation, a name that until a few hours ago had meant absolutely nothing to him, but which now carried immense weight. He knew that the moment he hit the send button, everything would change. The domino effect would begin, and nothing could be undone. His heart was beating loudly in his chest. He knew he was about to destroy another life, but at the same time, how could he allow that woman to continue living a lie? He closed his eyes for a moment. I had gone through the phase of anger, shock, devastation. Now all that was left was a kind of tiredness that he couldn't describe. A weight that could not be lifted, only carried. When he opened his eyes again, he made his decision. Pressed send. The cell phone remained in his hand for a few seconds, as if he expected an immediate response, but he knew it wouldn't happen so quickly. It wouldn't be simple. He stood up, feeling the weight of the decision fall on his shoulders, and began to walk through the house, which felt cold and strange. Everything seemed out of place, like it was no longer the home he built. He took the car key and left, he needed to get out of there. I needed to breathe. The night was thick, the city was lit by streetlights and headlights, but to him everything seemed dark. He drove aimlessly for a few minutes until he realized he already knew where he was going. The restaurant. The place where it all happened. Where Laura and her boss began what would become the destruction of their marriage. He didn't know why he was going there, maybe just to face reality head-on, to feel like he had some control over the narrative crumbling around him. He parked on the other side of the street, the engine still running, looking at the bright facade of the place that seemed so harmless to anyone passing by. For him, however, it was a scenario of betrayal. The cell phone vibrated. He picked up the device and looked at the screen. The answer had arrived. For a few seconds, he hesitated to open it. His mind swirled with possibilities. How would she react? Would you doubt it? Would I go crazy? Or maybe, you already knew. He pressed the screen and read the message. Is this some cruel joke? He closed his eyes. Of course. It was natural that the first reaction was disbelief. He typed back, his mind racing. I wouldn't joke about something like that. I didn't believe it at first either. But I have proof. Waited. The seconds seemed like an eternity. Then, the answer came. Me prove. He sighed. Of course. She needed to see for herself. Then, without hesitation, he began attaching screenshots of the messages he found on Laura's cell phone. Every word, every sentence he read that destroyed him would now be sent to someone else, to do the same damage to them that it did to him. He pressed send and waited. The minutes dragged by. He could imagine the scene on the other side. The phone in her hand, her eyes going over every detail, her breathing becoming irregular, her heart racing. He imagined the shock wave going through her body the same way it went through his. He knew exactly what she was feeling right now. The answer took a little longer, but it arrived. My God. Daniel rested his head on the steering wheel. I'm sorry, he typed, not knowing what else he could say. The answer came quickly this time. Are you sure you're my husband? He closed his eyes. How could she deny it now? But deep down, I understood. Desperation made her try to find an alternative, a possibility that it was all a mistake. Yes, he typed. If you need more proof, I can give it to you. The next message took longer. And when it arrived, it was short. Meet me. He took a deep breath. When? Now. Daniel hesitated for a second, but then typed. Tell me where. She sent the address of a nearby cafe. He knew that from that moment on, everything would change even more. He drove to the location in silence, feeling the weight of the moment on his shoulders. When he arrived, he saw a woman sitting at a table in the corner, staring at her cell phone, her eyes red. He approached slowly, and when she looked up at him, he realized there was no need for words anymore. She already knew. They sat in silence for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice shaking. How did you find out? Daniel sighed, running his hands over his face. I didn't want to find out. But she was careless. Little details. Different behavior. I started noticing things, and then I took her cell phone one night. It was all there. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. I feel so stupid. Daniel shook his head. We're not stupid. We trust the people we love. That doesn't make us stupid. It makes us human. She laughed, but it was a joyless laugh. I knew something was wrong. But I never imagined it. He was always so sure of himself, so dedicated to his family. I wonder how long he's been looking me in the eye and lying without hesitation. Daniel understood. Her every word was a reflection of what he felt. What are you going to do? She asked, looking at him. He was silent for a moment. I don't know yet, he replied. She nodded. Me either. The two stayed there for a while, feeling the weight of the moment, sharing a pain that no one else could understand. Then, she took a deep breath and looked at him. But I won't let this go. Daniel knew she was right. And for the first time, he felt like he wasn't alone. The silence in the cafe stretched between them. The woman in front of Daniel was still holding her cell phone tightly, her red, teary eyes, fixed on the screen as if trying to find a way to deny what was already undeniable. The air around them felt thick, filled with something that couldn't be described in words. He knew that pain wouldn't go away quickly. He knew that each of the next few seconds would be a crushing weight on her shoulders, as it was for him. Her world had just fallen apart, just as his had fallen apart before. But there was something different there, something he hadn't expected, a determination emerging behind that hurt look. He saw this because he recognized it. The same silent fury, the same desire for justice. She took a deep breath, her lips trembling slightly, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. I won't let it stay like this. Daniel just nodded. There was nothing he could say that would ease what lay ahead. Her marriage, like his, was already destroyed, but the wreckage still remained, and now the only question was what they would do with it. The meeting ended shortly after, without long goodbyes, without promises. It wasn't necessary. They both knew that this was not a closure, but the beginning of something much bigger. Daniel left the cafe feeling a bitter relief, a satisfaction that was not complete, but that at least gave him the certainty that he was not the only one to suffer the consequences of that betrayal. In the following days, the pieces began to fall. Laura's boss's wife wasted no time. She did exactly what Daniel had done, gathered evidence, consulted a lawyer, and prepared for a confrontation he imagined would be brutal. And then came the explosion. The story spread like wildfire. In Laura's office, rumors spread quickly. People whispered in the hallways, and the tension grew by the hour. Her boss was confronted by his wife inside the company, and the scene was worthy of a scandal. Shouts, accusations, the truth exposed in front of everyone. He tried to deny it, he tried to minimize it, but the messages, the evidence, everything was there. There was no longer any way to escape. The fall was quick and painful. He lost the trust of the team, of his superiors. He tried to maintain his position, but soon found himself cornered. The atmosphere became unbearable, the looks, the whispers. His once impeccable reputation was now destroyed. And then came the final blow. The wife filed for divorce and exposed everything in the social circles in which they moved. He not only lost his marriage, but he also lost his credibility, his prestige. Soon, the company began to feel the weight of negative exposure, and the pressure was too great. He was removed, then fired. Laura, in turn, did not emerge unscathed. When everything came to light, the consequences for her were also devastating. The respect she had within the company was destroyed, and working there became impossible. The silent hostility of her colleagues, the looks she previously ignored, now became unbearable. She tried to resist, but she knew she was finished there. He resigned, without many options. But the worst part wasn't losing my job. It was losing everything that really mattered. When she tried to see her children, she was met with resistance. Daniel didn't prohibit it, but he didn't make it easy. He didn't make a fuss, he didn't shout, he didn't forbid visitors, but the children, of their own accord, began to move away. They didn't understand everything right away, but they felt the difference. They felt the tension, the looks, the changes in their father's behavior. And little by little, without the need for direct interference, they began to reject it. The hugs were no longer the same, the visits were shorter and shorter. Daniel's silent contempt was reflected in them, without him needing to say a single word. Laura tried to rebuild her life. She tried to justify her choices to herself, she tried to believe that she wasn't a bad person, that she just made a mistake. But the reality was cruel. Nothing seemed to fit anymore. The man she had thrown everything away for was now alone, ruined, unable to help her in any way. Destroyed the only other person who could have been her escape. And Daniel? He didn't emerge unscathed, but he left with his head held high. It took time, but he rebuilt himself. The divorce happened quickly, without any more fighting than necessary. He sold the house, started over in a new place, far from the memories that weighed too much. And then, when he least expected it, he met someone. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't planned, but it happened. Someone who didn't carry the weight of the lie, someone who didn't look at it as a mistake to be fixed. And for the first time in a long time, he felt light. Not because I had forgotten everything that happened, but because I had finally put it behind me. Now, looking back, Daniel knew the pain would never completely go away. Some scars remain. But he also knew that he had overcome it, that he had moved on, that his life was not defined by the betrayal but by what he did after it. And Laura? She stayed behind. A shadow of a past that no longer had power over him. And so, the truth found its way. And in the end, the only thing left was the consequences. If you've made it this far, I want to know your opinion on this story. What would you do in Daniel's place? How would you deal with a betrayal like this? Leave your comment and tell me what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this. Here, we do not support any type of betrayal. See you in the next story.